Hey Tam, how you doing?
What's up, Clay? How you doing?
I'm hanging in there. Yourself?
Good, good. It's raining here, storming, but all
Uh,
is well. All is well. We're here.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of raining over here too, for sure. Over
Oh,
here,
really?
yeah, over here in North Carolina. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so should I have put the description thing? It asked me for my name.
Yeah, if you want. I mean, it's
Okay.
just easier for viewing purposes later on. Hey, that's
Okay.
completely up to you.
Okay. Is it too late?
No, it
Where
ain't
I
too
go?
late. You're right on
What I
time.
need to do?
It should have an option where you can just type it in. Do you see it?
Mm-mm. Oh, let me see. Let me go back. Uh, no. What is this? Image file. No, that's share screen. It was an option at the beginning,
Oh,
but I just didn't put nothing in there. So I don't know. I probably have to go out and come back in. But
we
I
could just
mean, it's fine to me. I don't.
yeah, we could just go right on ahead. You don't even have to worry about it.
Okay.
So, Tab, so I'm just gonna go off of these questions here. We'll just pick up the ball and
Oh,
go.
my bad. We're recording.
Yeah, I can
I
edit
messed up your recording.
it. You know what? Don't even worry about it.
Okay.
Yep. Don't even worry about it.
Okay.
Get right on into it, but this is my show, basically capital and culture that I do. It's more focused on more on a political advocacy, community engagement
Mhm.
side. So you're the
Mhm.
perfect fit for it. So we'll just get right
Okay.
on with it. So this Tam, just tell everyone who you are and what do you do.
Okay, cool. Well, I am Tamala, my government name, but everybody calls me Tam. I serve as the regional organizer for Alabama Arise, where we do advocacy, civic engagement around public policy that impacts people that are marginalized by poverty. So, all of our advocacy efforts, all of our lobbying efforts are around marginalized communities or advancing policies that are going to be beneficial for people that are impacted by poverty. So it touches a whole bunch of different things, but yeah.
That's great. So what drew you into advocacy and policy work from the jump?
um, it's funny because I feel like I got drafted without my consent.
Oh, really?
Because,
That.
yeah, one thing I always said, everybody that knows me, I always say I would never do politics and I never do ministry.
Oh,
And
wow.
somehow I am knee deep in both of them, even though I said I'd never do it. So God has a funny way of getting us right where we need to be. But I'm no stranger to advocacy because I was born and raised in Selma, Alabama. And so, for those of you that know your history, you know that a lot of what took place in the civil rights movement, a lot of significant things happened in Selma. There's so much history there. So I grew up learning about it, being surrounded by it. You know, I tell people Black History Month for 365 in Selma, Alabama. And so we knew about the importance of advocating and speaking up for our communities and for ourselves. So growing up around it, I also come from a family um, who were pastors. My parents were pastors my whole life. And they also were involved politically. So two of the reasons why I said I would never do it because I was around it so much involuntarily. I was born into it, and I was like, yeah, that's enough. I'm not doing that. But I would say my turning point happened personally in 2020 when during COVID, when everybody was watching George Floyd. I was actually in corporate America at the time. Like I was not doing any of this. I was in corporate America, and just like everybody else, I'm watching on the TV screen, and I'm like, oh no, like we got to do something. So while I'm working from home in corporate America, I am also in the chat, like, fighting off all of the bots and all of the people, like speaking up for injustice. I was an activist in the comment section on social media. And so that's what kind of it turned my heart towards like, okay, we got to do something. It's not enough to just, be typing in the chat. We have to do something. But it wasn't until 4 years later where I got laid off from my job in corporate America, that same job, because of things that happened politically, because of the economy and all that. And a good friend of mine sent me the job posting of the job that I have now. It was like, you would be perfect for it. And I'm like, and I applied, got the job. And so here I am. So I feel like, I do believe that I am where I'm supposed to be, but there was a journey to get there. There was, I'm not interested. Then there was my heart started turning. And so now I'm knee deep in it and I love it.
So what is your current job? Just tell the audience.
Well, I am a regional organizer with Alabama Rise. So basically, we build relationships with the community. We build relationships with other organizations that are in the fight or in the advocacy fight with us. And again, we're fighting to advance public policies or policy at the state level that's going to be beneficial for marginalized communities. So we're educating communities on, hey, this is what this bill means. This is what this policy means. You should probably lend your voice to this, like if you don't like this happening. So it's an education piece, it's also an advocacy piece, but then it's also us building relationships with people that are in the legislature to make sure that we're bringing the community voices to them. So yeah, so we're kind of a liaison.
I appreciate you restating that. So obviously, you mentioned doing a lot of legislative work. What has this current legislative session in Alabama taught you about what's really happening on the ground? If you have any testimonials from that to share.
Yes. So I would say that there is kind of a disconnect. One thing I walked away from, because I just started this line of work. So of course I'm no stranger to the process, but actually being in it, I realized that sometimes there is a disconnect between the people that we are serving and the people, so the community, and then the people that are supposed to be representing us. And a lot of times it's people not really understanding how the policy impacts them. And sometimes it's people being discouraged because they haven't really seen any benefit from being involved. Like, so we're telling them to be involved, but it seems like it's just we're missing each other. They're missing each other, basically. And that's where we kind of come in at to help kind of connect the dots. But I would say looking and just paying attention to what's happening in the legislature. I give you an example. One of the things that Alabama Rise pushed for this year was free breakfast for everybody. Now, in Alabama, there are a lot of rural and poor counties. And so, yes, we do have free breakfast for certain people, but or certain counties, but not everybody. But one of the things that we do know is that free breakfast impacts grades. I mean, well, let me back up, because a lot of children, the only meal they eat are the meals that they eat at school. Like, not because their parents are negligent all the time, not because they're homeless. I know of teachers, professionals who have had to be in a food bank line. They go to work every day, but they weren't able to afford to put meals on their table for their own children. And that's not just a negligent or an issue with somebody being lazy or whatever. That's a policy issue. People need they deserve to have their basic needs met. And so we've been pushing like, hey, let's make breakfast free for everybody. Now, people in the legislature, we are nonpartisan, so I'm not going to say who, but it's people in the legislature, they can agree. Yes, we think that everybody deserves to have, all kids deserve to eat and have breakfast. But they couldn't wrap their heads around the fact, well, I buy my kids breakfast. Why can't everybody else buy their kids free breakfast? And so there is this disconnect between sometimes the people that represent, they only are able to see based on their lived experience, like what's real for them, and not necessarily widen their perspective to, yes, you may be able to, but you're not just representing you. you're representing people that also may not be able to as well. And so there's this disconnect once you get there. They're saying all the right things to get in office, right? But then once they get there and it's time to make decisions, it doesn't seem like they are really being committed to representing the needs of the people. And people see that, like the community sees that. And so there's this distrust that takes place. And so for me, I think that that's one of the biggest things, but that's where advocacy comes in. You know, that's not a reason for us to sit back and not say anything. That's for us to speak louder, speak up, and hold them accountable. So I would say that. Did I answer your question?
You did. You did.
Okay.
Obviously, we're coming up on May 19th, the Alabama primary
Mhm.
at the current moment. So, with Alabama's primary happening basically right now, and that's as we're in this season, what should
Mhm.
people down there be paying attention to that may not be getting enough visibility, in addition to what you've already outlined?
Local elections, state elections. Everybody wants to jump on board and vote for president, but it's these local elections, your school boards, your mayors, your city council, your county commissioners, your judges. These are the things that you're going to actually feel on a daily basis. This is the stuff that's going to impact you. Not to say that the national or federal level is not important, but we really need to lean in into paying attention to who we're voting for on the local level. And so I believe, I know my push has been like, don't just wait on, you know, voting for somebody for president, right? Like it has its place, and yes, it does have its impact on us. But at the same time, what's happening on the state level, what's happening on the local level is just as important. These judges are the ones that are going to be determining, you know, the fate of people that come and stand before them. You know, like, so you need to know how their mind thinks. You know, that will impact, you know, loved ones or whatever. Like, so you also, these the school board members, they're going to be the ones that are determining, you know, how things work in your school system. They're going to be advocating for your children, the ones that in the classroom in your community, not on just on a national level, like, but in your community, the ones that you are actually experiencing. So I would say that we really need to be paying attention to who we're putting in these places, because a lot of times, you know, we can, when things are going wrong in communities that are around us or that we see every day, we place blame on the wrong people. We talk about the, you know, federal administration, like on the executive level, but that's not always, you know, they have their place. You know, I'm not advocating for them, but I am saying that there are some things when you're talking about roads, when you're talking about education, when you're talking about some of this stuff is decided right here in your state, right here under your nose. And so you have a say so in this. I would say that people need to lean in here. This is not when we need to, you know, take a snooze or take a water break. We really need to lean in right here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And as far as policy and community impact, where do you see the biggest gaps right now between policy decisions and real community outcomes?
Um, I would say it's that the gap in the relationship, like the intentionality around connecting with the actual needs of the people in the community. Again, sometimes I do feel like, you know, people that are in the legislature can do a better job with trying to hear the needs of people that are in the community and not just passing what they feel like. You know, I think once you, there's a thing called listening sessions that a lot of people have. And it's not just us sitting here listening and letting somebody rant, but it is being able to widen your perspective. I mentioned that term earlier. It's a way where you can see beyond your own lived experience. Like when I first came into this line of work, I remember the first listening session that I went to, and it impacted me. I remember going back to my husband, was like, oh my God, I knew, you know, some of these systems and the oppression and the impact was there, But it wasn't until I heard, a mother talk about, what the impact of Medicaid was going to do for her child, and how her child needed medicine, had a condition where they had to be on medicine every day. And, but because of that, she also had to be real close to the child. Like it impacted what type of job she could get, but she also didn't have a car. And there was this intersectionality, but she lived in a place that didn't have public transportation. And so because she doesn't have a job, she can't get better insurance, but so she's having to, have Medicaid, but they're talking about cutting that. And she's thinking about, well, what is this going to do for my child? Because the medicine they're on is something they need to live. And so there were all these different issues that came into place. And again, I knew that this was a thing that people, had to take advantage of Medicaid, and some people needed assistance in other areas. But because that wasn't necessarily my lived experience, I couldn't feel it all the time, and so that's why I think it's very important to make sure that we're listening, that we're bridging the gap, that we're being intentional about building that relationship, hearing what the community needs, because sometimes we could just guess and assume. And you need that intentionality to take back. It really widens your perspective, because sometimes people don't know what they don't know. You know what I'm saying? And so we need that when we're talking about taking those voices into the room where we're making decisions. You need to remember the voice or the story of somebody in Dallas County or the woman in Perry County. You need to hear that so that you'll be able to, when you're there, you're not just thinking about people that's in your circle or people that's in your neighborhood. You're thinking about, how is this policy going to impact those that are in the Black Belt or those that are in Northern Alabama, and try to make better decisions that way.
Yeah. So if you could expound upon more, what are you seeing or hearing from communities during this moment that feels important to highlight?
Yeah, I would say for some of them, they are, it's fatigue. It's fatigue because we know elections are secular, like, so they're gonna keep coming around, coming around. And so they feel, I think they know that they need to vote, right? Like, so we've said all the things to let them know that they need to vote. We've said everything. We've reminded them of the fight, what it took for us to get the right to vote. So they know all of those things. But I do believe when I'm hearing from them, they're saying, but I don't feel like it's helping, And so they're like, some of them just decide not to vote, but it's not because they don't really understand the necessity. Some of it is fatigue, but some of it is also, they have so many different issues that they're fighting that need their immediate attention, and so we're talking about on a state level, local level, but their basic needs are met, and so some of it is, well, my children need food like right now, and so I think that's why we have, groups, and it's important to have groups that are able to offer mutual aid to kind of help meet immediate needs, because policy and laws and all that stuff being passed, that's not going to happen overnight. But I do think a lot of times people can be tired, they can become weary, they can become, discouraged just by the everyday fight that they have. And so, our job, I feel like, is to keep them encouraged, connect them with resources to help meet the need immediately. But that's the biggest thing. It's not that they don't know what they need to do. Sometimes it's just a lot of different other barriers. And we know that that's a trick that sometimes people play. That's a strategy. They try to make it harder because they know that people are already fatigued, they're already tired. So they try to add these extra steps. All right, you got to have this documentation, you got to have that documentation. And it's a working mama that's like, listen, I did good to be able to get out of work to get here in time. Now you then switch my polling location. You saying I need this extra, forget it. But that doesn't help us. So it is reminding them, but I understand, but that doesn't help us by you taking your voice from the fight or not letting your voice or your vote. As frustrating as it is, we still have to push through. And that's what I admire about our ancestors back in the day. You
Yeah.
know, they had them reciting stuff and, you know, guessing how many pieces of bubble gum are in a jar and all those different things, like all this craziness, but they never backed away. They when they said ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, they were
Yeah.
serious about it. And so I try to keep that, carry that spirit, not just remember what they did, but I'm like, Lord, let me walk with the same spirit and tenacity and stick to itiveness that they had. Like, cause they literally stayed in the game. They, all right, I'm gonna come back tomorrow. I'm gonna come back tomorrow. I'm gonna keep showing up, and that's what we have to do. So,
What are people outside of policy spaces not fully understanding about what's happening? If you could just do a little more deeper dive into that.
hmm um, that policy impacts us. You
Hmm.
know, I told you at the beginning that I didn't want any parts in politics, because I think sometimes we could just look at the fight within that. You can see the backside of it. I believe in everything. There's a front side and a back side. The front side may be all the good things that you're able to do, the good that you're able to accomplish for the community. But the backside is a lot of fight takes place. You know, it's a process, it's a journey. You know, there's a lot of different systems, even for those that are, you know, representing us. They're having to go through a lot. They're still having to, you know, advocate within a system that sometimes is not set up for people that look like us. And so I would say that a lot of times we forget, or maybe because we're just trying to get through life, and I'm very empathetic with the community because life is life, right? Like, but I
Yeah.
do think that we have to realize that we can't afford to,
Complacent.
yeah, like we can't afford to just be like, I'm gonna sit this one out, you know.
Yeah.
And that was a realization that I had one day. I talked about the George Floyd, but I also have three children, and one day I realized, like, once I started seeing like stuff, like for instance on a national level, like being rolled back, like some policies that were in place, like being rolled back. I'm like, oh my God. In my mind, I'm like, are my children gonna grow up in a world that's worse than what I grew up in? Not saying that we arrived, you know. And so I realized that it's not enough for me to, you know, like, oh, somebody needs to do something. You know, I realized that I'm at the age now that my grandparents, my great aunts and their parents, they did what they had to do. It's on us now to make sure that we're advocating, that we're lending our voice, that our children and their children will be able to live a life that's better than ours. And so for me, I think that, you know, we have to make sure we can't allow just some of the foolishness that's taking place, or some are just, I mean, just the complications of all of this. Yes, those are real. The facts are real. That the system was not set up for people that look like us. But at the same time, that don't mean that we need to sit out. Like, we still need to make sure that we're lending our voice to the fight, that we're speaking up for our communities, we're speaking up for our children, we're speaking up for our parents, our community, all of those things, because policy is going to impact you whether you say something or not. Like, so you might as well lend your voice to the fight. So,
Yeah, you're definitely right about that indeed, because this is every election's important, even every runoff, every and
mhm,
elections are more than just it's not the end of a process, it's really the beginning of another process, because afterwards you still have to be a civically engaged citizen. You know, you have to
yeah,
attend hearings. They're not sexy, they're not glamorous, but do those things and get involved
yep,
advocacy groups and
mhm,
such. Now, you recently, well, we met at the intersection of you in partaking in Ignite the South and that
mhm.
leadership program. So explain that to me, and explain how did your experience with Ignite the South shape your approach to leadership and organization and organizing in general?
Yeah, yeah. So I wish I told the team at Ignite the South, I wish I could go through it again. It's one of those experiences really that I'll never forget. I feel like I built and was able to leave with a family of people that I'll never forget, that I always be appreciative of having the opportunity to take that journey with. But to answer your question, it reminded me that leadership is not just a title, it is a responsibility.
Hmm.
And it was refreshing because I'm from Alabama. Ignite the South, of course, it was made up of a whole bunch of other people that's doing the work, and not just in Alabama, but in Georgia and Tennessee and South Carolina, Virginia, like all of those places. And so it felt like a big hug every time we went, because sometimes with us doing this work, you know, I talked about the front side and the back side. You know, the front side is we get to make a difference. We get to change the world. We get to change the communities that we are a part of. But the back side is that we're also fighting against systems. You know, there are different things that we're having to overcome. We're still having to show up and encourage everybody when we need to be encouraged. And so I feel like going to Ignite the South was that encouragement. We were able to fill up, you know, so that we can continue to pour out, you know. And so it was, like I said, it was definitely just encouraging to know that we're not in the fight by ourselves, that we have people who are just as committed, just as intentional, who are around the South, that's changing the world in their own way, whether it was through education, whether it was through the legislature, whether it public policy, whatever it was, criminal justice, you know, immigrant rights. It was people representing all type of issues and communities. But it was just encouraging to know that we weren't in the fight by ourselves. And like I said, it felt like a big hug, and they were very intentional on, you know, tying history into, especially the history of minorities in advocacy and activism, and allowing us space to be able to draw from it. From that, they also gave us tools, you know, ways that we can make sure we take care of ourselves whenever we went. You know, they were like, we're here to serve you all, you know, like, so, you know, the team was like, whatever it is that you need. Like, if it was like a, I don't want to say it was a vacation, but it really was a space where we were able to just get poured into, because we do a lot of pouring now, but we were able to get poured into, which I think was very beneficial and critical for leaders, you know, like to realize that we're not immortal, you know, like, so as much as we're pouring, we need to make sure that we're being just as intentional, you know, about getting in spaces where we're being sharpened as well. You know, iron sharpening iron. It was one of those experiences. So forever grateful for them.
And I did apply through your referral. So thank you
Come
again, Ms.
on. Excited, excited. You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it.
I'm sure I will.
And y'all get to come to Alabama. They're coming to Alabama this go round. They do something new every time, but they're
Okay.
coming to Alabama. So I'll, you know, be able to see you.
That'd be good. That'd be good. So, Miss Tam, what does leadership in the South look like right now to you? And how is it evolving, if it is evolving from your perspective?
I do. I believe that it is. I I hope I wasn't so unbalanced today in making it seem like everything is an issue with those that serve in office. I do see a lot of people waking up. Like, I have the opportunity to talk to a lot of college students, like people from different generations. So with some older people, then I'm talking to college students. And, you know, sometimes people may think that young folk are not engaged, that they don't care. And, you know, they actually had opinions, you know, and so that was refreshing to know that they're paying attention to what's happening. And a lot of their opinions and a lot of their ideas were very comforting. I was very proud, you know, to know, because they're our next generation of leaders. And so I do, even though there is a presence of, you know, systems that do make it hard for us, I do see people waking up and wanting to be involved. And I do think that that's just ties to, you know, us pushing and reminding, like, hey, we got to stay in the fight. Ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. Remember that we can't just sing the song. We need to be able to see that in our walk. And so I do feel like in Alabama, we're seeing people, some newer generation, kind of join the fight. I know I'm encouraging, you know, college students, you're not too young. Dr. King, they were in their 20s. It was college students that was leading a lot of these movements that we read about. And so I do see people jumping in there, and I'm seeing people represent us, and I'm seeing even white people, stepping up and kind of saying some things. It's coming a little slower, but they're coming around, to see like some of the stuff that we've been talking about. So I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful that eventually that we will be able to see the change that we're fighting for. And I'm also hopeful that the next generation will be able to carry on what we've been fighting for as well, that it won't die once we pass away. That that's one of my goals. Is I don't want to let what those that have come before us be done in vain, Lord. And I don't want to have to start over. Give us wisdom to be able to glean from them, but also give us new strategies where we'll be able to fight the relevant fight that's in front of us right now. And so I'm very intentional on doing what I'm supposed to do right now, but also bringing other people along, because I know again that eventually my time will come where I need to, God may transition me. He will transition me, meaning I'll die. And so I want to make sure that the next generation doesn't have to start over. We're trying to figure out, well, what do we do? Like, so I am pouring into them, like, okay, we need y'all we need you to bring us in the fight, into the fight with us. So yeah, I'm hopeful. I see people, connecting to the fight, using their voice in their own way, and it makes me smile. It makes it a little easier to be able to wake up in the morning and continue doing what God has called us to do.
Sure. As far as looking, as far as forward looking, what's one other issue you feel deserves more attention right now?
Um, I would say because of where I work for Alabama Rise, and we do a lot of advocacy around policy that touch poverty issues. I would say that, like, I didn't realize, before I got into this work, about the intersectionality of issues. Like, so when we talk about issues that are impacted by poverty, or communities that are impacted by poverty, you're thinking about healthcare, you're thinking about public transportation, you're thinking about worker power rights, or you may have heard labor union. You're thinking about maternal health care, because you know, somebody may be like, well, what does maternal health, for instance, have to do with poverty? People that are in rural areas, they don't have access to OBGYNs sometimes, and a lot of those communities are in Black communities. Like, we've seen the fight or talk about just this imbalance of care that's taking place, maternal care, that has impacted Black communities over other communities. And so when you see the intersectionality of how one thing touches the other, and another, and another, and another, and when I'm talking about poverty, a lot of times people think extreme, like homeless. Like, I think I told you earlier how I know of a teacher who has to sit in a phone bank, I mean, in a food bank line. Like, so when we talk about what the poverty level is, I had somebody in Northern Alabama. They told me, they was like, I really do think that, we need to revisit what poverty is defined as, because he was like, I think just because of inflation and how much things cost, but people's salaries are not changing. People making six figures, and they like, I feel like I ain't making no money, and so, and when you have that, for instance, just based off of what the state or federal government may say poverty is, like, there are some people who may make too much to get assistance, but not enough to really meet their needs. And so it can look different. There's a wide spectrum of poverty, but it does impact not just those that are impacted from it economically, but it impacts people that also live in that community. I'll give you another example. When we talk about poverty and Medicare and Medicaid and all of that, there are rural hospitals that are there. A lot of in rural areas, a lot of people are maybe low income, and so they may rely on that type of medical assistance, to be able to go to the hospital, go to the doctor. So a lot of the revenue from those hospitals come from those people. When you're talking about making cuts there, that means that's going to cut the revenue from those hospitals, right? And so if the revenue gets cut, that means the hospital may close. So doctors, nurses, your job may be impacted by that. And so when you think about it from that perspective, it's not just about salaries. It's not just about income. It really does branch out and can impact those that live in those areas as well. And so I think if we do like a deep dive and people just kind of pay attention to that intersectionality, then they'll really see that that's a real important piece. I don't think I've always looked at poverty in that way. I've looked at it very extreme, like very, you have $0, like, but that's not the case. It's not always just income. It could just be, you being impacted by living in a community that is impoverished or the poverty level is low, because a lot of times, just based off policy, they don't get a lot of resources, and that impacts your quality of life. You may have to drive to the hospital now. And what about people who don't have cars? So how they're going to get health care if they don't even have a car. And then the lower income areas may not have public transportation. So that's what we mean by intersectionality of issues. So it's not just a money problem, it's a transportation problem, it's a healthcare access problem. So when you look at just how poverty touches all these different areas, I do think that that's something we need to pay attention to.
Right. Absolutely. 1000% correct. And final question, Ms. Tam, what gives
Mhm.
you hope as you continue this work?
I believe that we will be able to see the change eventually, even if I don't see it. I know Dr. King, he talked about like, I may not get there with you, but but it didn't stop him from fighting. So I believe that as long as I'm surrounded by people who are in the fight, not just to benefit themselves, not just to benefit their own world, but to benefit the world that generations to come will live in, my children's children, my children, their children. Like, I believe that as long as we keep our eyes on the prize, as they used to say back in the day, then I do believe that even if my own eyes won't be able to see it, somebody from my bloodline will be able to benefit from the fight that we have fought, because I know that I'm living in, and able to access like a lot of things, a lot of opportunities that I have are tied to somebody else still fighting that may not have lived to see it, somebody else's sacrifices that I may not have had a chance to meet. And so when I think about it that way, I carry that responsibility. Like, I don't want to drop the ball. And so those that are coming behind me, they're not able to experience that. My wish is that my children live in a world that's better than the one I was raised in. And so I want to make sure that before I close my eyes, finally, that I've done all that I can do to make sure that, they'll be able to live in a world that was better than mine, that was more advanced than mine, that they had more access, more opportunity. And so that's what keeps me grounded. That's what keeps my hope full. And, that's the hope that I try to pass around to everybody else.
Good. Well, Ms. Tam Glover, thank you very much for your time today. And how
Mhm.
can folks support you and what you're doing with your organization?
Awesome. So you can follow us. You can keep up with what we have going on. We are alarise.org. So that's ALARISE.org. We're Alabama Arise on Instagram and Facebook. So you can pay attention to what we have going on. We're always giving policy updates. If you care about what's happening in Alabama, or if you're in Alabama, we invite you to become a member of Alabama Rise, because we also are a coalition of just a whole bunch comprised of individual members. Those are just community focused and engaged. And then we also have relationships with other organizations that believe in the fight that we're fighting for. And so we've built this coalition, and we are member led. So that means that those that have joined our membership, they determine what we're going to be fighting for when the legislature is in session. So they may say, we want you to fight for worker power, we want you to fight for maternal health. They're telling us what we want, because again, it's not enough just to be doing the work. We want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the community. And so that's our way of making sure that we're not just saying a thing, but we're actually doing it in practice. And so we invite you to join our membership, and you can do that by following us or joining online on our website.
Thank you. This was definitely great, Tam. So I will definitely spread the word and keep supporting
Yeah.
you any way I can.
Thank you. Thank you, Clay, for having me. I really appreciate it. It was good talking to you.
Absolutely. All right.